I need to read the used names file and then write the story. The names to avoid are all listed in the document. Let me write a completely new story with fresh names. The call came in at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I always do when something feels off, and I can't put my finger on what. My phone was face down on the nightstand. When it buzzed, I rolled over and saw the name on the screen, Nora, and my stomach dropped before I even answered. Nora is 9 years old. My granddaughter. She doesn't call me at 2:37 in the morning. Grandpa? Her voice was so small it barely came through the speaker. I sat up. Hey, I'm here. What's wrong, sweetheart? She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing. Uneven, like she'd been crying for a while before she worked up the nerve to call. Then, I don't feel good. And nobody's home. The mud is home. Was already out of bed. What do you mean nobody's home? Where's your mom? She went on the trip. I stood there in the dark of my bedroom in my socks and I made myself take one breath before I said anything. The trip to Hawaii. Yeah. Okay. I kept my voice even. And they didn't take you. A pause, then a sound that wasn't quite a word, more like the sound a kid makes when they're trying not to fall apart. It answered my question well enough. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start at 2047 in the morning. It starts about 6 months earlier, in my son Devon's living room, when he and his wife Cassandra sat me down and told me they had something exciting to share. Devon is 41. He's my oldest. I have 2 kids. Devon and my daughter Margot, who lives out in Denver. Devon and Cassandra have been married 12 years. They have a biological son together, Bryce, who's 14. And 3 years ago they adopted Nora. Nora came to them when she was 6. She'd been in foster care since she was 4. Bounced around a couple of placements before she landed with Devon and Cassandra. When they called to tell me they were going to adopt her, I cried in my truck in a parking lot. I'm not ashamed of that. She was this tiny kid with serious eyes and a gap in her front teeth. And the first time she called me Grandpa, I thought my chest was going to give out. I should have seen the signs earlier. I think I told myself I was imagining things. Bryce got a car for his birthday last year. Not a beater, a used Civic in good shape. Fine. Kid needed to get around. But Nora's birthday came 6 weeks later and they threw her a small party at the house. Cake and a few friends from school. And the gift from her parents was a $20 craft kit. I didn't say anything. I bought her a bike. Christmas. Bryce got AirPods, a new gaming setup, a ski trip planned for February. Nora got clothes she needed anyway and a couple of books. I noticed. I kept noticing and kept telling myself it was a matter of ages. 14 versus 9, different interests. It wasn't what it looked like. I was wrong. So 6 months ago, Devon and Cassandra told me about Hawaii. They'd been planning a family trip, 10 days, Maui in the Big Island, a resort on the water, snorkeling, the road to Hana, the whole thing. They'd booked it as a 15th anniversary trip, they said, and they were taking Bryce because it was a special experience and at his age he'd really appreciate it. I waited for the rest of the sentence. There was no rest of the sentence. What about Nora? I said. Cassandra's expression didn't change. She's good at that, keeping her face pleasant and unreadable at the same time. Nora will stay home. We've arranged for her to stay with a neighbor during the days and she's old enough to manage evenings. I looked at my son. Devon was studying the coffee table. She's 9, I said. She's very mature for her age, Cassandra said. And the neighbor, Pam, she lives 2 doors down, has agreed to check in. Check in, I said. Keep an eye on things. I kept looking at my son. He finally looked up, and what I saw in his face wasn't certainty. It was a man who'd already had this argument and lost it, and who'd decided that not fighting anymore was easier than fighting. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself in a marriage that ended 20 years ago. It's the look of a man who stopped believing his own voice mattered. I said, Devon, this isn't right. He said, Dad, it's complicated. I wanted to push harder. I didn't. I told myself I'd call him later, talk to him alone, that maybe things would change. I even called him twice in the following weeks. Both times he said Cassandra had it figured out. Nora would be fine, it was only 10 days. I should have pushed harder. I should have driven over there and sat at that kitchen table until something changed. I didn't, and that's something I have to live with. They left on a Thursday. By Sunday night, Nora was calling me at 2047 in the morning, saying she didn't feel good and nobody was home. I didn't ask many more questions on the phone. I asked if she'd eaten. She said she'd had cereal for dinner. I asked if she was running a fever. She said she felt hot, but she didn't know. I said, okay, lock the front door, get in bed, I'm coming. She said, now? Like she couldn't believe it. I said, right now. Like she couldn't believe it. I said, right now. I live 40 minutes from Devon's house. I made it in 32. She let me in when I knocked. She was in her pajamas, the ones with the little stars on them, and her hair was a mess. And when she saw me, she didn't say anything. She just walked into me and pressed her face against my chest. I stood in the doorway of my son's house at 3:30 in the morning, holding my 9-year-old granddaughter, and I felt something harden in me that I don't think has softened since. She had a low fever. I found a thermometer in the bathroom cabinet, 100.8. Not dangerous, but not nothing. I made her some toast, found some children's Tylenol in the medicine cabinet, got her settled back in bed. She wanted me to stay, so I sat in the chair in the corner of her room, the one with the throw pillow that says "Dream Big," and I stayed until she fell asleep. Then I went and sat at my son's kitchen table in the dark and thought for a long time. By the time the sun came up, I'd made 2 decisions. The first one I acted on immediately. The second one would take a few weeks. The first decision was that I wasn't leaving without Nora. I called my neighbor Carol and asked if she'd check on my house for a few days. Then I went to Nora's room and started packing a bag for her. She woke up while I was doing it and watched me from under the covers. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked. "You're coming to stay with me for a bit. How do you feel about that?" She sat up. "Can I bring Clover?" Clover is her stuffed rabbit, missing one eye, been with her since the foster placement. "Absolutely bring Clover," I said. She was out of bed before I finished the sentence. I left a note on the kitchen counter for Devon. Short, factual. Nora was sick and alone at 2047 a.m. She called me. "I've taken her to stay with me. Call me when you land." I put my number at the bottom even though he has it, because I wanted the note to feel official. I wanted it to feel like the beginning of something. He called me 8 hours later. The reception in Hawaii apparently wasn't great. There was a slight delay on the line, that hollow sound that makes everything feel further away than it is. He said, "Dad, what's going on?" in the tone of a man who's been handed a problem he doesn't want to deal with. I told him what happened. I told him the time on the phone, the fever, the cereal dinner, all of it. I gave him every detail. There was a long pause. "She said she was fine when we left," Devon said finally. "She's 9, son. Of course she said she was fine." Cassandra talked to Pam. Pam wasn't there at 2:47 in the morning. I was. Another pause. Another pause. I could hear something in the background on his end. Water. Voices. A good time being had somewhere. I let him hear my silence. "She can stay with you until we get back," he said. "That's probably easier anyway." Easier. That's the word he used. I wrote it down on the notepad next to the phone. One of those reflex things I do, left over from 30 years of working in logistics, writing down everything that matters. I stared at that word for the rest of the afternoon. Easier for whom exactly? Nora stayed with me for 10 days. She slept in the guest room that I'd turned into something close to a real bedroom for her over the past year. A proper bed, a bookshelf, smart supplies. She picked that stuff out herself on a Sunday afternoon when I told her she could choose whatever she wanted up to $100 at the craft store. She looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. "Whatever I want?" "Yeah, sweetheart. Whatever you want." We had a good 10 days. We made pancakes in the morning and she helped me in the garden. We drove out to a petting zoo one afternoon and she fed a goat and shrieked and laughed. And that laugh is a sound I'd do anything to keep hearing. We watched movies at night. She likes animated stuff, but she'll watch old westerns with me if I let her have popcorn, and I always let her have popcorn. She asked me once, toward the end of the week, why she didn't get to go on the trip. I was quiet for a moment. I'd thought about what to say if this came up. That was a wrong decision, I said. Sometimes adults make wrong decisions. That one was wrong. Do they know it was wrong? I'm working on that, I said. She seemed to accept it. She went back to her book. She's a reader, always has a book going, usually two. Cassandra once said it was a phase, and I'd thought, even then, that's not how you talk about your daughter. Your daughter. That was the thing I kept coming back to. When you adopt a child, that's your child, not a placeholder, not a charitable act you can take back when it gets inconvenient. Nora had been legally their daughter for 3 years. She called Devon Dad. She'd chosen Cassandra's middle name, Marie, as her own confirmation name at school. She was in this family, she was theirs, and they had left her behind. Devon and Cassandra came home on a Wednesday. Devon came alone to pick up Nora. Cassandra, he said, was tired from the travel. I'd expected that. I made coffee. I asked how the trip was. He said it was good. Beautiful. Bryce had loved the snorkeling. There was a pause and I let it sit there. Then he said, I know this looks bad. Tell me how it looks from where you're standing, I said. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. He's got his mother's hands, wide palms, blunt fingers. I used to watch those hands when he was a kid, learning to throw a baseball, learning to drive. Now I watched them and I waited. Cassandra feels like. He stopped, started again. She loves Nora, but she feels like the adoption was something we rushed into and it's been harder than she expected and she needed a break. A break from a 9-year-old. It's complicated, Dad. Devon. I kept my voice level. The child had a fever and was eating dry cereal for dinner alone at 2 a.m. That's not complicated. That's neglect. He flinched at that word. Good. It was the right word. It wasn't supposed to go that way. Pam was supposed to go that way. Pam was supposed to go that way. Pam was supposed to. Pam. Cassandra is. He didn't say anything. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you to actually think before you answer. Do you want to be Nora's father? Not because you're supposed to, not because the papers are signed. Do you want to? He looked at me for a long time. His eyes were wet. Devon has always cried easier than he'd like to. He got that from me too. Yes, he said, I do. I just don't know how to. Cassandra and I aren't on the same page, and I don't know how to fix that. Then you need to figure it out, I said, because that little girl is in the guest room right now reading a book and she thinks you're coming to get her because you missed her. I need that to actually be true. He nodded, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I let him go get her. I listened to him from the kitchen, heard him knock on the guest room door, heard Nora say, Dad, with that complete, uncomplicated joy that kids have, the joy they give so freely to people who haven't always earned it. Heard him say, Hey, Bug, I missed you. Heard her ask if she could show him the seedlings we'd started in little cups on the windowsill. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard. The second decision I'd made that morning at the kitchen table, that one took a few more weeks. I talked to a family law attorney named Shepherd, a woman I was referred to through a friend at my church. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Then she laid it down for me clearly, the way I'd always needed things laid out. Not softened, not padded, just honest. She said that what had happened, leaving a 9-year-old home alone for an extended period without adequate supervision, could constitute child neglect under state law. She said I had options. She walked me through what a request for grandparent visitation rights would look like, and what escalating to a petition for temporary guardianship would require, and what evidence I'd need. I asked her what she'd do if it were her grandchild. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, I document everything. Dates, times, what the child said to you, her condition when you arrived, and then I'd have a very direct conversation with the parents before filing anything. Because courts always prefer families to resolve things without intervention, and because sometimes people just need to understand the stakes before they'll act differently. I'd already started documenting before I even called her. Habit of a 30-year logistics career. I had dates, I had the time of the call, I had a photo of the Tylenol receipt from the 24-hour pharmacy I stopped at on my way to Devon's house that night. I had notes in my own handwriting. The direct conversation happened on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after they got back from Hawaii. I drove to their house and I asked Devon to make sure Cassandra was there. She was, though she didn't look happy about it. I sat at their kitchen table and I put a manila folder on the table. I didn't open it. I just let it sit there. I said, I love my son, and I believe he loves Nora. I'm talking to both of you today because I want to give this family a chance to be what it's supposed to be before I take any other steps. Cassandra's eyes went to the folder. I told them what I had. I told them what I had. I told them what Ms. Shepherd had told me. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke slowly and I looked at them both, and I said that I needed things to change. Real change, not words, not promises. I said Nora needed to be included in this family in all the ways that mattered. Same consideration as Bryce for trips, for gifts, for time and attention. Real therapy for the family if they needed help getting there, and I would be a regular presence in Nora's life going forward, with or without their cooperation. But I was asking for it to be with. Cassandra didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You really go to a lawyer over this?" "I already have," I said. Devon reached over and put his hand over hers on the table. She looked at him. Something passed between them. I don't know what exactly. I'm not inside their marriage. But something shifted. She said, "We'll go to counseling." "Family counseling," I said, "including Nora." A pause. "Including Nora. And the trips, the birthdays, all of it. I understand what you're asking." Her voice was tight, but she wasn't wrong. She understood. Sometimes people need the stakes to be real before the understanding becomes real. I picked up the folder off the table. I tucked it back under my arm. I said, "I'm going to trust you to follow through. You should know I'll be watching, not to catch you failing, but because that little girl deserves at least one person in her corner who pays attention." I stood up. I shook my son's hand. I looked at Cassandra for a moment and I said, "She chose your name, your middle name, for confirmation. That means something. I hope you let it." I drove home. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while before I went inside. That was 8 months ago. Things aren't perfect. I don't think families are ever perfect, and anybody selling you that version is selling you something, but things are different. Devon calls me more. Not to manage me, actually calls, tells me how things are going. Nora's birthday this year, they took her to a pottery painting place she'd been asking about, and Bryce came along and apparently made a lopsided bowl that he was genuinely proud of, which made Nora laugh, which I'm told made everyone laugh. Small things. But small things are where it actually lives. Nora still comes and stays with me on school breaks sometimes. Last month she helped me build a raised garden bed in the backyard. She'd researched what vegetables she wanted to plant, and she had a whole list organized by growing season. I just followed her directions and handed her things. She's a serious kid. She always has been. Those serious eyes, but lately there's been more of the laugh in between. That laugh. She called me last Sunday, not at 2:47 in the morning, not crying, just because she wanted to tell me that the tomatoes were coming in at her house and she thought we should compare notes on ours. We talked for 40 minutes about tomatoes. I hung up and I sat there in my kitchen for a while and I thought about that morning in her doorway, her walking into me and pressing her face against my chest, and how I'd felt something harden in me that I said I didn't think had softened since. Maybe that's not quite right. Maybe it hardened into something more like resolve, the kind that doesn't go away, the kind that doesn't mean you stay in the chair in the corner until they're asleep, and you drive the 32 minutes in the dark when they call, and you put the folder on the table and you let it sit there. You do whatever you have to do. That's what being in someone's corner actually means. She's my granddaughter, not the biological one, mine. And that has never, not for one single day, needed any further explanation. I've thought a lot about what actually changed things. Not the folder on the table, though that mattered. Not the attorney's name or the word neglect said out loud in my son's kitchen, though that mattered too. What I keep coming back to is something simpler and harder to name. Devin is a good man who stopped trusting his own judgment. I've watched it happen over years, slowly, the way erosion works. You don't see it day to day. You only notice when the ground is already gone. He knew, somewhere in himself, that leaving Nora behind was wrong. I saw it in his face the day they told me about Hawaii. He was studying the coffee table because he couldn't look at me. A man who is certain doesn't study the coffee table. That's the thing about letting someone else's certainty become your own. You trade your sense of right for the quiet life. And for a while it feels like peace, but it isn't. It's just the absence of friction, which is a different thing entirely. Real peace is what you feel when you act in line with what you actually know to be true. Devin hadn't felt that in a long time. I could see it. I don't think Cassandra is a monster. I think she made a decision, and then made another decision to defend the first one, and then made a life out of not examining either of them. That's not evil. That's just what happens when people stop asking themselves the hard questions. The hard question in this case was simple. Do I actually show up for this child the same way I show up for the other one? And the answer, for years, had been no, and nobody had made the stakes real enough to force a reckoning. That's what the folder was. Not a threat. A reckoning. I've learned at this point in my life that people don't generally change because you appeal to their better nature. They change when the cost of not changing becomes real. I wish it were otherwise. I wish I'd said something earlier. Pressed harder in those conversations before the trip, driven over there and sat at the table months sooner. I didn't. That's my part in it, and I own it. But here's what I also know. When I finally did act, I acted without cruelty and without hesitation. I drove 40 minutes in the dark because a 9-year-old called me and needed someone there. I documented everything because I'd learned a long time ago that the truth matters more when it's written down. I sat across from my son and his wife, and I spoke clearly, and I didn't flinch, because Nora needed at least one person in that room who wouldn't. Nora called me last Sunday about tomatoes. That's where we are now. That's what on the other side of the hard thing looks like. A kid who calls her grandfather on a Sunday to talk about her garden, easy and unself-conscious, the way kids are when they feel safe. You build that. You build it by showing up, by not looking away, by being willing to be uncomfortable in someone else's kitchen if that's what it takes. Nobody gives it to you. You just decide that a child matters enough to do the uncomfortable thing, and then you do it. And you keep doing it until the ground under her feet is solid. That's all it ever was. That's all it ever needs to be.